Start part 5 of Informal Japanese. Again, picking up kind of an odds and end that we just don't fit into the main categories here. But in this one, we're going to take a look at am doing. And if you recall, we learned this in the beginning part of Japanese too. This was the idea that you're doing something right now, like I'm eating, I'm watching TV, I'm sleeping, or whatever it would happen to be, where the action's happening now, kind of thing, and it's continuing from the past to the present and will probably continue to the future. An example of how we did this is here is tabete imasu. And this one, the rule was, again, to take the te form and then you add imasu to the end of it. Tabete imasu. I'm eating right now, kind of thing. Well, because this would be something that would end a Japanese sentence, there's an informal form for it. And we'll do this and then we'll do the negative and we'll count these as a couple things. And we'll just make one little side note about this as well. The informal form of tabete imasu is tabeteiru. And what also is worth noting here is that this little e sound in this often falls off in conversation. So oftentimes you're not even going to hear that. Sometimes even when you're writing informal, you'll leave that off as well. Tabeteru. So you kind of, that goes silent as well too, which can be pretty common. Now, you might be wondering, okay, wait a second, what's the rule here? And it's pretty easily explained either with one concept each, which we'll do, or just with one concept for both the positive and the negative, or for just one larger concept. And this is the idea that for this tabete imasu form, you're basically taking the verb imasu, which comes from iru, which if you recall goes way back with the idea I am, I exist kind of thing for something that's animate. And so this is basically just the mas form of that verb iru. So, stick with me here because I think it'll make sense. If we think about how you make the informal form of a mas form, you just use the dictionary form, right? So that's what we just did with this one. We took the dictionary form of imasu, which gets added on to the te form to make I'm doing something now, and the dictionary form here is just iru. So basically all you're doing is you're using the informal forms of imasu and sticking it onto the te form. If you can remember it with that one rule, that will help you remember the other one too. But if you want to remember it case by case, that's fine as well. For here, we'll just put down that the rule is imasu changes to iru, which of course can help you see that this is the informal form. This is the formal form of iru, and this is the informal form of iru, to exist. So literally, I'm eating, existing, kind of thing like that. So there's our first example. Let's do a couple of examples and see how this would work. Nonde imasu. What would the I'm drinking? How would you say that I'm doing that now, but when you're talking to friends? Pause the video if you need to. Answer is, once we reacquire our technical difficulties, nonderu. So imasu changes to iru. It's going to be the same for all things. So it's pretty straightforward here. Let's try another one. Shiteimasu. I'm doing something, kind of thing like that. Hai shiteimasu. I'm doing it. Answer would be shiteru. So pretty straightforward. But very common, because this tense is actually really common. Something, if you think about it, you use it in English a lot. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm playing a game. Kind of thing like that. It shows up a lot. It's worth kind of concentrating on it and kind of learning it as its own little thing. So let's pull these around to the side and consider the other side of this that we haven't looked at yet, which is what would the negative be? So this is that I'm not doing kind of thing. And here's our first example, mitemasen, which is I'm not watching, I'm not looking, kind of thing like that. Now, if we know that the informal form works like this, you should be able to pause the video and figure out what the simple informal form for this would be. And I'll give you a hint before you do that. So it's imasen, it comes from iru. What's the informal form for just the masen form? So, okay, what's the rule there? Which maybe you know, look it up if you don't. And then this is the dictionary form, so how do you make that form out of that? Pause the video, take a second, then I'll bring on the answer. Answer is miteinai. And like we mentioned with this miteru one here, oftentimes in conversation, this e sound goes quiet. Miteinai, I'm not watching, I'm not looking, kind of thing. Now, let's just backtrack to unscramble the rule here. This is imasen. It comes from iru. And we know that in the masen form, for what we've learned so far with action, the informal form is just the nai form. So we have to make the nai form of iru. The nai form of this iru, because it's a ru verb and it has an e sound in front of it, is just drop the ru and add nai. So that's what we're doing. Just dropping the ru and adding nai, and iru becomes inai. Now, that's one way to remember it. If it's easier just in this case to remember that imasen becomes inai, that's fine as well. But again, you can use that larger concept to kind of get at the idea that, okay, we're just going to use the informal forms of iru no matter what happens in these two cases. Let's go through just a couple of examples. Let me just shuffle this one out of the way. Oyoidemasen. I'm not swimming. How would you say I'm not swimming in informal Japanese? Answer is oyoidenai. I'm not swimming. And one more. Kaitemasen. Can you guess what the meaning is? I'm not writing. And in this case, informal form, kaitenai. I'm not writing. There you have it. 2 more pieces of the informal Japanese puzzle. We just have one large piece to go. However, we kind of have to put an asterisk on part 5 because there's one little extension thing that we haven't learned the formal forms for that we will pick up before the end of the year, and we'll cover the informal for that. But at this point, you don't have to really worry about it. That says that there are past forms of these two. So we have tabete imasu was I am eating. There's a past form for it, which is I was eating. And there's also a past form where like, oh, I wasn't watching, kind of thing like that. So when you're describing a continuous action over the past, just like you would in English, it's different than you say, I didn't eat it. Or I ate is different than I was eating. The same type of thing applies in Japanese. We haven't learned the formal forms of those, but there are informal forms. They follow really that same rule, which is going to use the informal form for iru as well. So at some point later in the year, we'll pick up those other little 2 pieces to complete this whole package with both sides. But for right now, these 2 things are there, and you kind of already can figure out what the rule would be and where those are going. That brings us to the end of Informal Japanese Part 5. We just have one thing left to do, which is the informal forms of let's. And that is a little bit tricky. There's 3 things to know about it, but not overly complicated. And then we will be all done. So great work. Keep going.